Happy Mardi Gras, everyone. The rest of the panel is very dubious about coming up and joining me on stage as I look like this. But, happy Mardi Gras, Carnival. In Detroit, it's Punch Key Day. We're missing out on that today, unfortunately. But I have the distinct pleasure of sitting next to Doug Melnick from the city of San Antonio. Doug is the Chief Sustainability Officer there. Natalie, Jakub from Green Living Science in Detroit. Chris Castro joining us from Orlando, Sustainability and Resiliency there, and Sarah Yeager from the city of Pittsburgh. We've had, this morning, had a lot of conversations about grid modernization, the water systems, how we do things with a more intentional focus on driving sustainability. But now we get to really hone in on the systematic solutions that each of our respective communities and communities around the world are facing when it comes to driving sustainability. And so I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be talking with all of you. And maybe instead of me just doing an introduction, Sarah, why don't you start us off and give us a little bit about you and your background?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having us here. It's always interesting to connect with other cities and learn from other cities, so I appreciate this opportunity. My name is Sarah Yeager. I'm the Climate and Energy Planner with the city of Pittsburgh. My main focus is our Climate Action Plan. Our city council adopted our third Climate Action Plan in 2018, with our first one being adopted in 2008. So we've had about just over 10 years of working towards climate action and working towards mitigation, but really in the past couple of years have recognized we need to really ramp up our efforts. So I lead our work around the Climate Action Plan as a whole, but largely am focused within our energy-related goals. So I work a lot for our 100% renewable electricity goal and then our 50% energy reduction goal. We have a host of other goals ranging from buildings and energy to transportation, food, waste, and then also just urban ecosystems and how we make a better environment in the city of Pittsburgh in general. So a lot of different things we're working on, but broadly in that climate sphere.
Thank you, Sarah. Chris, I had the chance to come down and visit you a few months ago in Orlando. We had a fantastic conversation. You're doing so many great things there, but tell the audience a little bit about your work there.
Thank you, Chris. Pleasure to be here. Also my first time in San Antonio, so this is a beautiful day. Thanks for that.
Doug helped arrange that.
Doug definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability and Resilience, and this is actually a relatively new office that's been established, but our efforts in sustainability have dated back to 2007, similarly to where in Pittsburgh, cities were starting to look at how can we drive forward sustainable, healthier, cleaner environments. Orlando's uniquely situated in being the most visited destination in America. This past year, we saw over 75 million people come to visit and play in Orlando, and that's about 200,000 people a day, an additional 200,000 people every day in Orlando, consuming energy, consuming finite water resources, congesting our roadways, and so sustainability has to be part of the core priorities of what we've been working on. So Mayor Dyer launched what's called GreenWorks Orlando. This is the brand that we've been working off of, and it is very holistic. It's very comprehensive in looking at green buildings, clean energy, zero waste, natural systems and ecology, clean water, local food systems, and multimodal transportation. And so my office gets to really work on policies and programs, both looking internally as well as externally to advance our city forward. And I like it because we're kind of this in-house sustainability consulting firm. We get to work with every department and division. I'm talking police and fire, planning, permitting, street, stormwater, as well as with our external partners, our utility, our transit, universities, academic institutions, and our businesses to really advance this culture of sustainability in Orlando and hopefully live up to that name of being the true experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Hopefully you guys got that acronym right.
Well, you talked about culture, and I think that that's a wonderful segue into what your work is, Natalie, because you at Green Living Science do so many wonderful things to help spread education and culture throughout Detroit and Southeast Michigan. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so again, thank you for having me. My name is Natalie, and I'm the Executive Director of Green Living Science. And as Chris mentioned, we work on education. So our primary focus is on environmental literacy throughout Detroit, and we do that by working in 3 pillars. We work with our school system, we work with businesses, and the community of Detroit as a whole. So our education program started out of the city's drop-off recycling facility. So we were starting by working in teaching about natural resource conservation and proper recycling practices and waste disposal. But that has quickly moved to now we're educating youth about advocacy and using their voice to speak up for issues that are important to them. With our business community, we help to reduce waste and set up recycling programs. So we're trying to encourage our business leaders to be models and or set up the models and be leaders in Detroit to help us to lower our waste diversion rate. And then through the community, and this is where I wear a couple hats, I am the chair of the Recycling and Waste Reduction Subcommittee for our Detroit City Council's Green Task Force. So work really closely with our council members influencing policy that will affect Detroit, and so that we can start to reduce waste. Currently in the city, we send about 3,000 tons of trash to a landfill each day, and we'll probably get into more of those challenges. But and secondly, Green Living Science is a contractor to our Department of Public Works. So we provide the outreach and education to residents throughout the city, helping them to learn about proper waste disposal, the services available to them, and then we help them sign up for free recycling carts so we can get more people participating in that program.
Thank you, Natalie. And Doug, thank you again for this beautiful day here in San Antonio. It is such a pleasure to be down here with you. I know you get to work with a lot of the stakeholders and partners that have been speaking throughout the day, but tell us a little bit about your mission as the Chief Sustainability Officer for San Antonio.
And so I'll just say, if it's a nice day today, I think in the next day or two it's supposed to be freezing, and then it'll be 100 degrees, so enjoy it while you can. So I've been here for about 6 years. I came here from New York, where I was Director of Planning and Sustainability for Albany, New York. Like our other communities that have been outlined here, there's been a lot of work for a long time in the arena of sustainability. You've probably heard about some of the great leadership from CPS Energy, being a real early adopter in terms of pushing renewables, as well as some very progressive energy efficiency programs. Our water system, San Antonio water system, is an international leader in water conservation, and this community has responded. But when I got here, there really wasn't a comprehensive plan that really sort of went where it needed to go. And so we had created a plan similar to Chris's plan, SA Tomorrow Sustainability Plan, which covers all the basic aspects of sustainability that the community should focus on. But then when our new mayor, Mayor Nirenberg, came on board, and the new council threw us a curveball and passed a ordinance in support of the Paris Climate Agreement, and sent us on our way developing our first climate plan. And so basically for the past 2 years, worked on that plan, adopted by council this past October, calls for carbon neutrality by 2050, as well as taking active measures to adapt our community to those changes. So right now we're just spinning our wheels and figuring out now what. It's a big commitment, and so it's really about realigning. Really making sure that internal municipal operations and decisions that are being made are in alignment with that long-term commitment, as well as beginning to work with the broader community, residents, businesses, institutions, and other stakeholders on making sure our practices and policies and programs are in alignment as well. I think that the challenge that we all have is climate change is pretty clear. That's the starting point that we're working with on implementing this plan. It's dire. It's not getting any better, and there's time constraints. And so how do we actively mobilize as quickly as possible, given how local government works? And that's sort of one of the things that's the overarching work that we're dealing with now, is how do we accelerate? Because sort of the global system isn't going to wait for us to figure it out, and that's basically the daily challenge that we're all working with.
Doug, Thank you so much for so starkly laying out the magnitude of what we're dealing with. I would be really interested, and I want to get this from everybody on the panel, some of those specific challenges that you're encountering in your respective communities. As we talked before the conference about how we're going to shape this discussion, there's so many avenues that sustainability impacts. I mean, Chris, you mentioned the police and fire and just thinking outside the box, but we realized we couldn't cover them all. Right. Even if we spent the whole day up here, exactly. We couldn't. Yep. So we thought we'd talk about energy and transportation, green buildings, food, and waste to really to keep things on track. Buckets. The big buckets. Right. So I'll start with you. In the city of Orlando, what are some of those most crucial challenges that you're facing?
So I would break up the challenges in social, political, and technical at the end of the day. One is the complexity of the issue at hand takes a systems thinking approach, and I was super happy to hear the concept of systems thinking thrown around. Often we're looking at these problems in silos and trying to solve them in silos, and more we're beginning to realize that in order to solve one, you have to solve multiple, or you can solve multiple. Food waste is a prime example. Normally we were just thinking about diversion of food waste, but now we actually have a commercial food waste collection program where we're moving it to a waste-to-energy plant and creating renewable natural gas that creates electricity, and now minimizing the amount of raw fossil fuels that we're using to power the city. That's one example of how we're trying to kind of look at things more in a system. The other is on the political side of things, and in Florida we have sensitivity. We, from a regulatory perspective, it's a little bit challenging. We also have this interesting grab as of the last 4 or 5 years of state government trying to preempt local government in carrying out our own business in our communities, and that's a serious threat to the ability of us controlling our own destiny. When they're trying to pull the rug out from under us. They just preempted, as an example, the ability for us to protect our tree canopy and the urban forest. And so we no longer can require a permit or a notification or even a mitigation fee of anybody trying to remove a tree from our city. That's ridiculous in my opinion, but it's very difficult for us to continue to build out the livability and quality of life goals that we have when you have states trying to come in and remove those. That said, I do think that lends itself to other very innovative new models that we can create in terms of partnerships, and we can dive into some of those as well.
Well, this is a very safe space, and here in San Antonio, we can talk about local control, and I know that we've talked a lot in the last couple of days about this is city of the future, but it is a community-wide approach, and it is city, county, region, state, and beyond that all has to work together. Sarah, tell us a little bit about those challenges over in Pittsburgh or up in Pittsburgh.
I think first I would just echo a lot of what Chris said. I think a lot of these problems exist in all cities or most cities. There are very few unique problems from city to city. A couple things I might add, though. One is just the scale. We look at it in a couple different ways, one being that we operate as a business. So the city of Pittsburgh, 3,000 employees, 300 facilities, 1,500 fleet vehicles. We're trying to improve our operations while also then being responsible for improving the sustainability of the city as a whole. So just over 300,000 people, a number of universities, a lot of large corporations. How do we not only do that internal piece, but external as well? And that also then leads to kind of the issue around prioritization. As a city, there's endless issues that could be tackled, but a limited budget, limited staff resources, and limited capacity. So figuring out how we do take a lot of these different issues and what are the priorities, how can we convince people of what should be prioritized, or how can we make sure that we're integrating our sustainability concepts and our priorities from the sustainability office into all of these different priorities of different departments, of different community groups, of different stakeholders within the city. So there's kind of that scale that's one of the issues, and then also just how do we fund and have resources to address some of these topics.
Funding is is a challenge that I'm sure all of you would speak to. Doug, as you mentioned that San Antonio's got your new climate action plan. I'm sure putting that together was a significant challenge, convening with multiple different stakeholders. But outside of that, what are some of the specific challenges we see here in San Antonio?
So how long do we have to?
Yeah.
No, but I think that the political aspect is very important. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we're in Texas, and San Antonio is only the second city in the state to have a climate plan. Houston and Dallas just released their draft plan, so I think we're definitely pushing the envelope. But we're also the largest consumer of energy in the country. So how do you reconcile those things with an aggressive agenda to address climate? Similar to Orlando, the state government doesn't necessarily like us doing whatever we want to do. And so we always have to sort of look through that lens of, will this trigger a response? And it doesn't stop us from moving forward, but being cognizant of it. And then I think, trying to have a balanced approach, and sort of gets to that first thing that I had mentioned, that we need to be aggressive, we need to move fast, yet we need to bring the broader community along. Where there's a segment of our population that wants very quick, immediate aggressive action, there's those who don't necessarily think so. Our council is supportive, but they want a balanced approach. So that's one of the things that we need to reconcile is how do we move as quickly as possible, but bring everybody along? And then adding a layer on top of that, and what we're seeing cities across the country really dig into, is just the idea of equity. That's there's a lot of talk about it, but I think everyone's still struggling with what it means and how do you implement it. And we framed our climate work around just making sure that anything that we implement doesn't have any unforeseeable negative consequences, but adding on top of that, really making sure we can use the process to try to address any historical inequities, really around inequities due to race. And so there's just layers and layers of things that we're trying to accomplish, and had been mentioned. How do you prioritize? And then sometimes I don't complain about resources because I know there's other city departments like ours that have less, but our work plan is enormous, and how do we ensure that we're making progress?
Yeah, and just to quickly add there, when I look at our roles as sustainability officers really fall in a number of different categories. One is, how can our cities begin to reduce GHG emissions and actually mitigate the issue? Secondly, we're looking at this notion around social equity and inclusion. How are we ensuring that we're bringing all people within our communities up forward? Thirdly, we're looking at this notion of resilience and adaptation. We know that we're baked for a certain amount of climate impact, so what are we doing in order to enhance building codes or make sure that we're more resilient? And then quality of life, right? A lot of the other sustainability topics that might not fall directly into climate but have a relation. So we're constantly kind of juggling priorities as we've been talking about here to really move us in the right direction. And it's a relatively new position when you compare it to government over the last several hundred years, right? It's kind of this new future-ready perspective on how do we ensure that our cities can sustain long-term quality of life, economic growth, and prosperity while not impacting natural resources in the environment, right? That's the conundrum.
It is absolutely a conundrum, and I'm so glad both of you brought this up. This idea of environmental restorative justice, I think, is very crucial, and it's something that Natalie and I see in our community in Detroit, where I can think of one neighborhood, Del Rey, which is right on the border with the bridge that leads over to Canada. It is one of the two most polluted areas in the entire country, and undoubtedly it is lower socioeconomic citizens that live in that area, predominantly. Our black and brown citizens, unfortunately, live in that area. It is a really tragic situation, and an example of an exploitative approach that we've had for a long time, not entirely a governmental, but the government didn't help at that point. And your vision in bringing in San Antonio a balanced approach for all, that we can do positive, sustainable environmental things while simultaneously making sure that we redress some of these, the systemic issues is absolutely crucial, not just here in Orlando or Pittsburgh or Detroit, but around the world.
And that's a journey, not a destination, right? It's something that will take time, but we need to deliberately address it as we move forward, and that's something that we're definitely committed to doing in Orlando, and I know many of the cities on here.
Yeah, and so, excuse me, I'll get off my soapbox and go back to being a moderator for a second. Pardon me for that intrusion, but Natalie, walk us through some of those other challenges that we're facing in Detroit. And some of the educational challenges about waste reduction in the city.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up the 48217 area, though, because that kind of goes back to the history of the city, and we have a lot of industrial pollution. We have, if you follow us on the news, we have green ooze that's coming out of our freeways. We have PFAS that's showing up in our water. We have pet coke piles, and we have the Marathon oil refinery, which is adding to that pollution. So we have a lot of history about environmental justice issues and environmental racism that's occurring. And so when we try to talk to residents about sustainability and the importance of sustainability to them, the first few questions that they ask are, but how is this going to impact me? How is this going to improve my quality of life? And when you have families who are wondering how they're going to meet their basic needs every single day, it's really hard to get them to see that being green or being sustainable should be top of mind. So what we're doing in our education programs in schools is we're working with students at the early age of pre-K and talking to them about the importance of our health and the environment, and how what we're doing to the environment is going to impact our health. So we're trying to connect the dots for not only our young students, but for the adults that we talk to, when they understand that there's implications of what we're doing to the environment and how it could potentially impact their families and them, they're more likely to be on board of the sustainability train and seeing how it can make a difference there. So with our youth programs, we're not only talking to them about waste and why that's important to our community. We have a litter problem in the city, or land pollution. It's just been embedded in the culture of the city. You see it on the side of the freeways, you see it in your neighborhoods. And so just to point out something, our Sustainability Action Agenda came out last year, and they conducted a survey with 6,800 people who live in the city, which is a small amount considering we have about 700,000 residents. But the number one issue that was important to them was safety, and the second was clean neighborhoods. So we know that our residents want clean neighborhoods, and so whatever that means for them, we've created, or our Office of Sustainability has created action items to address that. But in our pre-K programs, we're talking about those issues of recycling, what that means for the environment, our ecosystems, and we play a fun game. We litter a little area in their classroom and pick it all up and ask them if they're going to throw litter on the ground, and they all shout out no, but then there's always one kid who says, but my mom throws trash on the ground. So that's something we see all the time, and it's cute, but we're trying to change that culture of our residents and teaching them about advocacy and how to use their voice and how to create that clean neighborhood that their families desire.
That's a great story, and it really does speak to the cultural and educational approach that we all have to take. We've really starkly laid out some of the challenges, but this is a great group, and I know that each one of you is full of, for every challenge, you're full of dozens of solutions. So let's dive into that. And Sarah, I'll turn back to you right now. What are some of those most innovative and exciting opportunities that Pittsburgh has when it comes to tackling these problems?
Sure. Before I get to that, I think one other point, though, just like you talk a lot about the education piece, one other thing we've seen really, one more challenge before I get to the happier part, is around also, so if you make it greener, does that mean it's going to gentrify more quickly? because there is this perception of things that are better are then going to cost more, and the people who are in that place currently are going to be pushed out. So that's always the other piece of education I think that we struggle with is we can provide or we can help you access these services or access this higher quality building or higher quality house without pushing you out. And so how you balance that, I think, is a key part of the education piece as well. As far as solutions that we're working on in Pittsburgh, one thing that I think is interesting is always to hear where sustainability teams are located within the structure of a city. And so for us, we recently moved into our Department of City Planning, and that has really changed how we operate as an office. Chris, I think you mentioned being kind of that internal consultant. And so we've really been able to take more of that consulting role as a part of the Department of City Planning. All of our major developments, all of our universities, a lot of the core of what is happening in the city comes through the Department of City Planning. And so we're then able to be at the table when the University of Pittsburgh is doing their 10-year master plan. We can be at the table and say, well, can you build this lab better? Or how about you provide bikes instead of parking at this residential hall? And really be having those incremental impacts across all that's happening in the city. So that's one thing that I see is really exciting and really has been a shift in just about the past year. We're also changing a lot of how we as a city operate, changing all of our procurement. We talk a lot about waste being one of the difficult things to tackle, and what we see as one of our most difficult goals is our zero waste goal, because that's a goal citywide, which again, there's different scales of we're trying to do zero waste internally, but then how do we also encourage the city as a whole to do zero waste? But just small things like changing our procurement guidelines to require that if we host an event, no styrofoam is allowed to be brought in by the caterer. Or those, again, small incremental changes we've seen as a big part of getting to these larger goals. And that's everything, again, from our food contracting, the furniture that we're buying for our offices, all the way up to our electricity, where we're finally being able to change the whole structure of our electricity procurement in order to really achieve some of those renewable goals. So I think being able to see how those incremental steps add up, and then also how across different departments, across different sectors within the city, those small changes are really starting to add up, is what's most exciting for us.
I know that measurement is a big passion of yours, but I want to frame your answer, and feel free to take it anywhere you want to go on this. But you mentioned 75 million tourists come and visit Orlando every single year. So you have the twin task of serving your everyday citizens, and then also sustainably serving the lifeblood of your economy. What are some of those solutions that you're using to approach that?
Yeah, there's a couple of, we work very closely, as you can imagine, with Universal Studios and Disney and SeaWorld and some of the other big attractions that bring a lot of those people. And I will say that type of collaboration has really helped to address some of these issues. On the electric vehicle side of things, we launched a program called Drive Electric Orlando back in 2015, and the whole effort was to be the EV test ride city for America. Because we had the #1 amount of visitors, we can get them into these EVs, and through their experience in Orlando, essentially give them perks. So it's basically what we call plug-in perks. If you go to pluginperks.com, you can learn more. And so we worked with the theme parks, the Central Florida Hotel and Lodging Association, and outfitted a significant amount of EV infrastructure. Right now we have 358 dual-hosed EV charging stations in Orlando. We're adding another 175 over the course of the next 8 months. But in addition, the theme parks contributed to reduced parking, preferred parking at the theme parks, and a free charge throughout your experience. So really trying to get them to experience the electric vehicle and hopefully change their purchasing habits as they move forward. The anaerobic digester I talked about for food waste, this was a P3 also with Disney, where they were able, because of their scale, to land an actual anaerobic digester at scale. And we launched, as a result, a food waste collection program for hotels, for restaurants, and any food service industries. we pick it up in a 65-gallon cart multiple times a week. We take it and tip it into the anaerobic digester, and it's cheaper to tip into there versus the landfill, so we're saving money there. And then in addition, that power is being exported onto the grid and helps to minimize our overall consumption. So it's this interesting closed loop, and again, trying to work with the tourist to get them to think differently. Taking the question a little bit more broadly, I wanted to talk about a couple of other innovative applications as it relates to renewables. I often say when you fly into Orlando, it's like an Atlantis in reverse because of the amount of water that's around us. The way that we manage stormwater is we build these man-made ponds and essentially, capture that water as it rains. And we've started to now explore floating solar, photovoltaics, and the ability of landing these racking systems that can float on top of the water body. They actually can move based on the actual water levels. And they're usually close to an actual load, whether it's a community, an HOA, or a commercial business. Every single development that puts impervious pavement on has to build this type of pond. The water's got to go somewhere. So floating solar is really exciting, and we're now about to expand that to the airport to where we'll have about a megawatt of floating, or 500 kilowatts or so of floating solar at the airport. Our utility has been, OUC, Orlando Utilities Commission, has really been on the forefront of trying to think about also new models to accelerate some of this growth. So we have a community solar program, now about 250 megawatts of signed contracts in the pipeline, but now starting to explore kind of on-bill services. So we have this on-bill lighting program, no upfront cost retrofit. Now we're starting to look at expanding over 25 different ECMs, energy conservation measures, for commercial and multifamily buildings. Again, taking the upfront finance barrier and then charging on the bill over time, things like retro-commissioning and building automation and controls and other things. We have the same program with electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So if you're a business and you want to land chargers, you can go through an on-bill finance program where the utility will land the charger for you with no upfront cost and incrementally pay over time. The last model we're exploring now with the utility is electric buses. A lot of transit authorities are in a really difficult situation in that the vehicle replacement funds that they get from the FTA to replace those buses are based on the legacy bus technology. And when you're looking at the electric buses, they're about $200,000 to $250,000 more up front, but you do see those savings over the 8 to 10 year period. So what we're trying to do is a battery as a service model, and we've just got approval from the utility, the city, and the transit authority to test our first 8 buses this way. The utility will provide the infrastructure that will pay for the batteries in the buses. So transit's still thinking your traditional $400,000 to $450,000 bus, and then transit will essentially pay a lease payment every month for that battery back to the utility. The utility then is getting repaid through the bill, right? And at the end of that term, right around year 8, we'll take the battery and we'll make it a stationary asset to improve grid reliability, grid resilience. And then they'll replace another battery in the bus and you're off for another 8 more years of useful life. So we're trying to figure out really innovative models that, again, get around that financial hurdle. We know that's the big upfront. And then leverage the ability of our utility to repay using the utility bill. I think that's a major opportunity we have.
It clearly is a major opportunity, and that idea of sustainability also driving some economic benefits in terms of long-term savings. When you think about a total cost of ownership, and this speaks to the broader systematic approach of a one solution can have multiple different benefits to it. Natalie, would you talk to us a little bit about some of the most exciting educational solutions and solutions that you're seeing in the city of Detroit in terms of driving some long-term waste reduction and environmental sustainability?
Yeah, when we talk about recycling and what's happening at the city, or even at the national level, we know that recycling is not doing well. So a lot of communities are canceling their programs. In Detroit, we've committed to pushing our program forward. Like I mentioned earlier, we help residents sign up for free bins. And what that means is we can give them a free bin by providing education. So the way that we're tackling this, and this is our solution, is that we're trying to reduce the amount of contamination that we're receiving in our recycling so that we can have a successful program. So we conducted a study last year with some funding from a foundation and found that our contamination rate from the city for the about 30% of participants was about 22%, which is less than the national average of 25%. So we're taking that number as a benchmark for us to continue monitoring what that contamination looks like every year. But also from that experience, we were able to see what people are trying to recycle. It's an interesting thing to do if you live in a city and you have an opportunity to do that. But then we were able to change what how we're educating people, what kind of materials we're pointing out, and now the city just launched or announced the largest expansion of recycling in Detroit's history. So a lot of people are wondering why we're doing that when the market rates are low for materials, but we've made a commitment to wanting to increase our diversion rate. For the city of Detroit, we only have a diversion rate of 4%, which is almost like nothing. So we're now going to be pushing forward recycling at all of our municipal buildings, recreation centers, public spaces. So I'm excited to see all the public bins outside, especially that they're right next to a trash can, creating those stations, as well as commercial buildings and multifamily housing. So this will be phase one of a larger rollout, but we're going to be testing different methods of education, making sure that recycling is easily understandable across all ages and all participants of the program.
Quickly to add to the waste conversation real quick, because this is a challenge that all of us are facing right now. We've started to look at a couple of different innovations. One is this concept of standardized society-wide labeling. In this country, there are millions of different types of recycling labels that are telling us to do different things. And it's the analogy is if the stop sign was not a hexagon that was red and it was a triangle in a different city, would you actually stop at it, right? We've standardized these types of labels so that we know wherever you go, you do the right thing. So we started to roll out the standardized society-wide label by Recycle Across America, and it has helped. We've also developed an app, and it's called ORL Collects, and basically virtually any product that you have, you could either take a picture of it or you can write in what we call a waste wizard, and it will tell you, can you put this in your single stream recycling? If not, can you take it somewhere to be properly recycled? And at the worst case, unfortunately, throw it away in your recycling, in your trash bin. So communicating to the residents. The last thing is a feet on the street campaign that we did. We saw some contamination in particular neighborhoods and we targeted them and literally went house by house and tagging their recycling bin based on contamination. We gave them an oops tag if they had too much contamination. We gave them an attaboy tag, and we were shocked at people taking selfies and posting them on social media about the fact that they're good recyclers in Orlando, and it created this kind of cultural awareness. And we've done pre and post studies of that, and I've seen an increase of about 25% more recycling and cleaner recycling as a result. So those are some of the kind of innovations that cities are starting to look at to improve recycling moving forward.
I'm glad you mentioned that because yesterday Paula opened up the conference showing 2 videos about fun social nudging that we can do. And it's not really gamification, it's funification. We can change behavior by having a little bit of enjoyment. Yeah, by doing that. And that kind of segues back into some of the great innovation solutions that we've got here in San Antonio.
Okay, so the next,
this is
the next 30 seconds.
You've got the last word,
Okay.
Doug.
One of the things I'd mention is, new and exciting things. All of our cities are part of a North American network, and we just steal each other's ideas. And so, what's working in Orlando, we're going to want to look at it and test it. And so, anything I'm going to talk about has already been probably stolen from somewhere. One of the things we really want to begin working on in the city, and we're developing a program, is how do we start institutionalizing our sustainability and climate work, getting to that idea of breaking down silos. So the idea of getting our mayor, our city manager, our executive team on board with what our annual objectives are around climate and sustainability, and then creating a series of delivery teams further down in the organization to have the responsibility to bring that about. And it starts creating accountability into the process based upon key metrics. Because if nobody owns it, if we're not working across departments, we're working against ourselves. So that's one thing. The other thing that we've been doing is there's a nonprofit organization based in Austin called EcoRise. They provide sustainability and climate training to K through 12 teachers and students, and it's an international organization. But we've been partnering with them to really start getting into the schools. So we have more climate literacy with those coming up, which, believe it or not, they're way ahead of any of us. And then third, I'd say there's a lot of policies and programs that we're evaluating now. We have a couple working groups in place now, looking at EV and solar ready requirements for new construction, as well as benchmarking and disclosure. When we look at where the city of San Antonio's communities' greenhouse gas emissions are coming from, really the biggest chunk is from energy that's going to our buildings, particularly the commercial industrial sector. So basically, over 30 cities have adopted programs that require these big buildings benchmark their energy and water use and report it to the city. And the key is, once these building owners start seeing what's going on in their buildings, they're going to take advantage of whether it's property assessed clean energy programs or any utility rebates. And we see those cities experiencing some good reduction in energy use in those building sectors. So we're looking at lots of different things.
I will say, just really quickly, the utility partnership to carry out this benchmarking policy was absolutely critical. One of the challenges that building owners face is, in order to do that benchmark, they have to get this set of 12 months of their utility bills. And often we have this triple net leased arrangement where each tenant pays their own bill. So if I'm the building owner, it's a nightmare for me to capture 300 different apartment, units and 12 months of their utility bills. So OUC, we worked with OUC to develop this whole building utility data portal that essentially any building owner that's required goes through OUC, and they actually anonymize and aggregate all of those meters into just 12 months, right? So each month you aggregate all of your meters into 1 kWh, 1 kW, and that makes it much more simpler for these building owners to comply with the policy, but then they're able to see a full snapshot of their whole facility. And so that relationship with the utility is absolutely critical. And I know that Pittsburgh has also
Duquesne
had
does,
experienced some of that as well.
Well, I wish that I could keep talking to all of you the rest of the afternoon, and I'm
be here all day.
Yeah. Sarah, Chris, Natalie, Doug, thank you so much, because it's your work and it's your vision and it's your passion that I can see the transformation taking place before us. So thank you all very much.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.